Here is a simple exercise based just on observation and can be done by anyone regardless of any belief, non-belief, non-anything. Very few people see any connection between the Bible and evolution, and most would throw up their arms in despair at even contemplating such a thing. But looked at in a certain way, there are similarities. The Bible was written 2,000 to 3,000 years ago by normal everyday people like me and you. Unknown scribes, court servants, priests, musicians, shepherds, soldiers, and so on. If you don't believe that, and you still think that the Bible was in some way written or inspired by a supernatural being, then you have been led astray by your church preacher and pastor, and have not done enough research for yourself. Evolution has also been written in inverted commas by every creature, living organism and molecule of bacteria which have ever lived. And if you don't believe that, then look at a human example of evolution which has happened in just a few thousand years. Never mind a few million. Try taking any 21st century unfit, computer-bound office worker back to the Stone Age and see whether he or she survives. Now the second link. The Bible is full of mistakes, contradictions, exaggerations, violence, death and destruction, and totally crazy laws, such as you have to stone your own children to death if they bring you grief and disrespect. That's in Deuteronomy chapter 21 in the Old Testament Bible, if you also find that unbelievable. Evolution is also full of imperfections, mutations, exaggerations, death and destruction, most of which David Attenborough ignores in order to provide a politically correct programme for the BBC. On to the third point. In spite of all its faults, hidden amongst all the nonsense, the Bible contains prophecies which have come true, such as Daniel chapter 2. Prophecies which are coming true today, such as Daniel chapter 12 verse 4, and a master plan for the future of the world. That is in Revelation, the last book of the New Testament. Evolution also has at least two hidden worlds. One is called DNA, and the other is its apparent non-design. Everything about evolution can be explained by science and natural selection, and there is no need for a supernatural cause or designer. It runs itself. But it seems the Bible already knew about that as well. If you read this carefully in Genesis chapter 1, you'll find it's the sea or water which produces life, and the land which produces life, and then the creative process takes place, and not the other way round. And finally, the fourth point. In spite of all its problems, the Bible has moments of order, beauty, inspiration and poetry, such as Psalm 23 or John chapter 1 verse 1. It goes even further, of course, and says that the person it reveals as Jesus Christ is a saviour of the world, and your personal saviour. But I'll leave that subject for another video. Similarly, there are moments of beauty in the natural world, but they too are ephemeral. So here are those 4 links or clues put together. Most people would say then that there's no need to be a cause or a design behind it all, but when these similarities are pointed out and put together, it makes you wonder that it can't all be coincidence. There are more. During the 60 or so years that I've been on this planet, I have become more and more convinced that if there is a designer or creator out there, then he, she, it or them are not interested in evidence, particularly the empirical scientific evidence that we would all like to have in a scientific technological world. Instead, he, she, it or them have left the world like a crime scene. A clue here, a clue there, but otherwise nothing. The crime scene has been wiped clean by an expert. So, it's up to us to find these clues and signposts if they're there, collect them together and come to some sort of conclusion. The similarities between the possible design of evolution and the story of the Bible is one of those clues. If the expression he, she, it or them leaves you a bit confused, I'll stop for a minute and explain it. The first verse of the first chapter of the first book in the Bible is translated incorrectly in every Bible in the whole world apart from the Hebrew version. It continues to be incorrect for the rest of the chapter and most of the Old Testament. It should read as you see here. Elohim is a plural of El. This leads me to believe that there was more than a singular God around at the time of creation. Perhaps it was the whole host of heaven that were involved in creation, but nobody has a definitive answer. One thing it does show is that we should never think we understand who or what God is. Here's just one example from evolution. Millions of years ago, our ancestors first began to walk upright because it gave them a distinct evolutionary advantage. They could see further and were less likely to be eaten by predators. At about the same time, their front legs became arms and hands, and the idea of tools and weapons began. This was a huge step forward and separated the humans from the other primates forever. Nowhere in this world will you ever see another primate cutting wood with flints and using them as spears, or taking branches off trees and making bows and arrows in order to hunt for prey. Fast forward to today and we're surrounded by more tools and weapons than you can imagine, and another destruction of the planet and the rest of the evolutionary tree is probably just around the corner. I say another because, as any well-informed person should know, almost total destruction has happened before, on at least 5 occasions. Scientists call these extinction events, which is a polite way of saying that the then known world rained down every imaginable force of nature and destroyed virtually everything that moved or didn't move. Asteroid collisions, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, floods and even an ice age, some of them happening all at the same time. Again, another clue just waiting to happen. And finally, the tools and weapons. Looked at from the perspective of the rest of the natural world and the evolutionary tree, humans are an aberration. They are a departure from the normal course of events and a huge mistake. No other branch of that tree has produced a progeny which has self-consciousness and an ability to destroy every other branch. Humans also destroy their own habitat, which, as far as I know, no other creature does. This gives us 2 more links or clues. Here is a prophecy from the Revelation, which not only says that Yahweh Elohim will destroy the destroyers of the earth, but seems to imply that the earth is more important than people. So, if the Hebrew Yahweh Elohim is at least 50% responsible for this aberration of humans on the evolutionary tree, then you can find this clue in Genesis chapter 6. That's only 6 chapters after the supposed creation, but could be millions of years in evolutionary terms. It makes no difference. The link or clue is there. The natural world is quite self-sufficient without the existence of humans. The more you look at it, the more you will see that we are a mistake in both religious terms and evolutionary terms. Just one more clue before I go. It's a commonly known fact of evolution that life probably began in the sea and then spread millions of years later to the land. Eukaryotic cells, bacteria, algae and sea vegetation were the first obvious and visual forms of life. Again, Genesis gets it right, and gets it right twice. If you look carefully at Genesis 1, you will see that from verse 1 to verse 13 we have light, then the sea, then the land producing plant life. Then it appears to start again in verse 14, but the order is the same: light, water, then land. Now check out any map of evolution which you can find on the web, and you will see that these three elements are essential for the beginning of life. Remember that Genesis was written 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. How did the writer know